Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Another edition of Opening Line by EliteSportsBetting.com. Breaking down the college football slate. Frank and I, as always, Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock. Pretty fantastic week of college football.
Yeah.
We've kind of had like a couple weeks here where it's been a little boring. We have had a little bit of chaos during it. Obviously, Penn State losing last week to Illinois started that off. But before we get into this week and how the games look and previewing the week 9 slate, how have things been going? Because you might be the hottest college football bettor in the country right now. Things have been going pretty well.
Yeah, I'm trying not to shave. 5-1 again, pretty sweat free. And the loss was Clemson at Pitt, and Kenny Pickett just lit it up. And Clemson has QB issues, and they've got all sorts of things going on.
They've had a lot of issues.
Yeah, I mean, they were still respected to the market. The number went down a little bit. They did have they had one of their wide receivers or two wide receivers hurt in that game, but that was just a really bad showing. That Pitt defense looks a little bit better than what it did since the loss to Western Michigan. Yeah. They do have a good pass rush. That's one thing that's sort of remained constant. I saw a stat on the broadcast I actually wasn't aware of, is that since the start of the 2019 season, Pitt has the most sacks by far in all of college football, which I found pretty surprising. And second place was Clemson, but they had a decent gap between them. I don't know. It was a good week. Like I said, most of my bets were pretty sweat free. That almost never happens. And even in the loss in Clemson, right. If they just had stopped and got a garbage touchdown at the end, I would have covered that one too. So unfortunately, it didn't happen. Kenny Pickett is just too good, man. He's so good.
Yeah, I think you mentioned the market was on Clemson. I think that was the last push for Clemson. Like that was kind of like a put up or shut up game. The defense, it's kind of like one of those things. Like eventually the defense starts wearing down. A little bit of injuries here and there, and then like why should we put in so much effort for this shit offense? Like every level of their offense is terrible. Quarterback play is terrible. Offensive line play is terrible. Like they had drops. That was another thing you didn't even mention. Like they had they had a wide open touch by their most.
There was a point in that game where I was like, "This should be 17 or 21 0."
It easily could have been 14-0 Pitt or Clemson. And Pitt wasn't like cooking on offense yet. Like it would have been a nice gut check to see if Pitt.
DJ threw a terrible pick, and he threw a terrible pick in the red zone, and then the drop by Shipley. Shipley played great, but the drop
by Shipley was I've never. It was one of those ones where you're like, oh, that's a for sure touchdown because he's sure-handed, and it was a perfect ball, like great throw. You can see why like DJ was a top quarterback in his class. Like it was a great throw on a rope, and it was just right through his hand. That's basically sums up the Clemson season.
I honestly, I'm wondering if he's going to play or split time this week. He just doesn't throw a good ball. I don't know how to describe it. Like there's not a lot of zip on it. It's pretty rarely a spiral. Like I don't know. I think that also compounded his issues with the drops, is that a lot of those balls, even though they should have been caught, I don't want to make excuses for him. I just don't think he throws a very nice ball. I think he struggles with that.
The Clemson offense is just a straight up mess. I went 3-4 last week. Was very close to going 5-2. I know doesn't matter in this sense, but Alabama, Tennessee exploded in the fourth quarter to go over.
That was tough.
They scored 3 touchdowns in under 3 minutes. That was fun. And Ohio State, Indiana went over by a safety. So that was good fun. And Ohio State scored 30 points in the second quarter in that game. So just didn't get the breaks, but we move on. It's still been good season. Good season for you. Good season for me. We're sitting at like 15 units combined from us. So again, head over to EliteSportsBetting.com. A couple plays from us today, but the rest of the plays, Frank's got 5 this week. I only have 3. A little bit of a market was kind of good this week. I don't know, but
lower for me as well.
As always, before we get into it, Elite Betting on Twitch, hit the follow button there. YouTube, Elite Sports Network. If you missed the show, you can go back and see all of our breakdowns. But let's get into it. I mentioned great slate, a little bit of playoff implications on a lot of teams here. Michigan and Michigan State, the first one, probably the biggest in terms of where teams are ranked. Maybe not the 2 best teams playing, but Michigan State plus 4.5 at home here. Total is 50. This seems like the one at Michigan, they're a good team. they just are. There's a couple. It's like the typical good team, right? There's a couple things they just don't do well. Can they throw the ball downfield? They haven't really needed to. Kind of in the Nebraska game. Michigan State, I think we all agree, is the worst. Market makes them 4.5-point dogs at home. Can Michigan State, against the two best defenses they played this year, that offense has kind of looked okay, but not great. Can they score enough points here to stay within this number? What are you thinking about this game?
Yeah, I think these teams are fairly similar. Really good offensive lines, really good defensive lines that have kind of propped them up against bad teams. You know, Michigan State has beat Miami and Western Kentucky. I think those are their best wins, and Miami's proven to be pretty fucking bad. Michigan hasn't really played anyone either, though. You know, but they have run for 335 plus yards for the last 3 games. I don't know if they'll get there against Michigan State, but my bigger question this game, and from what I've gathered, just watching and kind of following along some of the Michigan games this season, is do we think Harbaugh sort of like learned his lesson here to like avoid like needing the quarterback in big spots? Like, I don't know. This Michigan teams reminds me of like Georgia Light, where like they haven't had to have a pressure packed offensive drive, but they also haven't had to do that because the defensive line and the defense in general has been good. And they've run the ball really efficiently, right? They're one of the more efficient runners, offensive run teams in college football. So if they can get a lead and they can avoid the situation where they have to throw against this Michigan State defense that has proven to be way better than what we thought it was going to be, if they can do that, I think they'll be fine. Michigan State, on the flip side of the ball here, they get big plays, whether it's like from Kenneth Walker on the ground, or they get some big passing plays. I think Michigan's going to play this extremely conservatively. They're going to make Michigan State like have 10, 12 play drives and score. I think Harbaugh sort of learned his lesson. I think he's going to try to keep the game in front of him on both sides of the ball. I think they'll play it really conservative, close to the chest. This is like this 51-50 hang out there. Like, I didn't play anything in this game, but if I'm looking at anything, man, I think both these teams are like, don't turn the ball over, don't turn the ball over, don't turn the ball over.
Yep.
Let's take a shot when we need to. And beyond that, this is 3-point game, 4-point game, with a late drive possibility coming in at the end. I don't know. I think Harbaugh, from watching him, and you're more of an expert on him and his team than I am, but it seems to me like he's avoiding needing the quarterback. Like, he finally has a team that like he doesn't have to throw the ball in situations, but they also haven't played anybody, so it's really hard to tell what's going to happen here.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. I would be absolutely shocked. Like, the identity of Michigan's running the ball, right? They have 2 fantastic running backs. Their offensive line is good. Now, they do have both of their guards are questionable. Both guards got hurt in like the last couple minutes of the Nebraska game. They sat last week, which they didn't need him against Northwestern. But I think they're going to come out. They're going to try to run the ball, right? Like, that's what they're going to try to do. If Michigan State can't stop the run, they're going to lose by like 3 scores probably. Like that. It's just it is what it is. Michigan's going to kind of like military academy them. Like, all right, we're just going to run the ball down your throat for these huge, like, long drives. They like to get that 5-6 yards on first down run, and then they're in these short, medium throws. But I think what your point about explosive plays, I think that's the key for Michigan State. Michigan's defense has been a little bit leaky in terms of big plays. The Nebraska game was a perfect example. I know Nebraska kind of threw the kitchen sink at him with a bunch of, Scott Frost with his crazy concepts of his offensive mind. And Michigan kind of did have to throw the ball there to win that game, and they did a decent job. They still were able to be, I guess, more balanced. I'm not saying that they aired it out, but they did throw it 39 times to kind of come back in that game, because that was kind of a back and forth game. So it'll be interesting to see if they can do it against a Michigan State defense here. It wasn't exactly like, Cade McNamara threw for 400 yards in that game. But they showed that ability. But Michigan State, if they hit those big plays, the other thing is if Michigan can score in the red zone. That's been one of their issues. They've been efficient in getting points on the board in the red zone, but they've been kicking too many field goals. Like last week, they fumbled on the 3. They got stopped inside the 5. It's just one of those things. Can they figure out how to, really push it through? I think whoever, like, if Michigan scores in the red zone, and if Michigan State, whoever gets more explosive plays, or if Michigan's scoring in the red zone, I think is going to kind of win this game. But I'm with you. This number just like automatically seems too high. It's kind of like the like Army Navy game at the end of the year where it's like 42 and you're like, there's no way.
We're just gonna punch each other for
like,
4 quarters, and whoever's left standing, that's
right. Like these two teams are just like, I'd be kind of shocked if it was a blowout in any way. Like Michigan, both teams are not really meant to blow teams out, right? We saw Michigan State got up to a lead against Nebraska at home. They had one first down the entire second half. They won in overtime. Like they're just, both these teams are just not built to just like like an Alabama or a Georgia like punish teams when they're down. It's a rivalry game. Maybe someone will do, but I'm with you. This 50 was 51. It's ticked down a little bit. It just seems like this is like a 24-17 type of game at max here. So should be a great game. 12 o'clock start. They got the early game, which I guess helps Michigan, if you will, less rowdiness in the crowd at the night game. But start off our week with a fantastic matchup. So another playoff contender facing what everybody thought at the beginning of the year could have been like an outside playoff contender. Miami goes to Pitt here. Pitt currently -9, total is 61. This is kind of ticked down both under and Pitt. Obviously, huge letdown spot for Pitt. I know Clemson isn't good. That is that's such a big win, right? Like that's probably the biggest. I know Pitt upset Narduzzi in 2006 or Clemson in 2016, but it's probably the biggest win in terms of what that means for them, obviously being a legit playoff contender. We were talking before the show, like there's a scenario where Pitt's 12-1 and there's like 6 other teams that are probably just as or more deserving. But could be a little bit of a letdown spot. I leaned under in the earlier number. It was like 63, maybe 63.5 if I remember correctly. But this number's ticked inside of 10 here. Miami, since benching Derek King because he wasn't really fully healthy, has kind of played some wild games where they're scoring. They've had some close losses. Can they keep it close here with Pitt, or do you see a letdown spot for Pitt as well?
Well, I think the line movement is coming because Addison and I don't even know how to pronounce the other kid's name. The running back who kind of plays slot as well. Abikonda or something. Israel Abikonda, something like that. These guys are really good. They're really athletic. We kind of saw them with Clemson. Every time they got matched up against a linebacker or safety, they absolutely burned them. They both went down with concussions. It looks like which one was going to play? I
wide receivers definitely out, if I remember correctly.
Let me check here. The running back number 2, Israel Abikonda, is going to play. It looks like Addison is still questionable, but that looked pretty bad. He tried to go in the game, and then he's kind of stumbling around, and they pulled him and diagnosed him with concussion. So I think that's why this number is ticked down. With those guys in, I made this game 10.5 and 60. So I did agree with the movement down, but losing 2, at least hampering 2 of their best, I guess they probably are their 2 best offensive weapons outside of obviously Kenny Pickett, is a big hurt for them when we saw them exploit that Clemson defense. Now, I don't know that Kenny Pickett is going to struggle against Miami. Everyone has lit Miami up this year. I don't think he's going to have a problem there. But this is a classic spot for Pitt where like, wow, we got that big win. Now let's lose and at least completely ruin our chances of making the playoff here. There are avenues. There's very live avenues for Pitt. So I do think there's some motivation there. I think Kenny Pickett is honestly, I think he's the best draft prospect quarterback in college football, having watched a couple of his games and a few of the other guys. I watched Bryce Young last week and he's very good. And I watched it right after the Pitt game. He just doesn't have the arm strength. And Matt Crowd just doesn't have the arm strength like Kenny Pickett does. This kid throws the ball harder than anybody I've seen in college football. And we've seen guys like Josh Allen and those sorts of guys succeed in the NFL purely on arm strength and a little bit of athleticism. He ran for a ton of first downs, huge first downs on 4th down and 3rd down last week against the Clemson defense. And I have no doubt that with healthy weapons, I think Kenny Pickett can light up any defense in college football. So I didn't have a play on this game because the number moved down, but I did lean a little bit towards the under. I've been on these Pitt unders for about 3 weeks now, and a lot of it is because of what we saw the last 3 weeks. They get a lead, and then they just burn you. They somehow find a running game late in these games where they just wear you down. I don't know if it's because the defense is chasing these receivers and these athletic guys on offense around the whole game, and they eventually get worn down and they can't keep up because Pitt throws the ball a ton, obviously. But late in these games when they have a lead, they absolutely ran it down Clemson's throat last week, and they did that the week before, where against Virginia Tech, and Virginia Tech isn't good, but their defense is decent. They just ran it down their throats. They didn't have to put stress on the ball. I could see this game playing out kind of similar to that. Pitt's pass rush is very good. I think they'll contain Miami's a little bit of athleticism on offense. I think they'll be fine. The defense has looked good the last few weeks, pretty much since that Western Michigan loss where they gave up 44 points and lost, 44-41, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
The defense is good. They got a ton of pressure last week again, and I know Clemson's offensive line is bad and not great, but the alternative is not getting pressure right against a bad offensive line. So, I like Pitt again in this one. I think the injured athletes on offense has driven this number down, but under 10, man, kind of seems like a lot. But the history of pitting of this Pitt team, especially under Narduzzi, is kind of scary for me. So I am staying away. But if you turned my arm and made me play something, I think I would just lay the 9 points.
Yeah, you bring up a good point with Pitt kind of wearing the team down. Against Georgia Tech 3 games ago, 78 plays on offense for Pitt, 64 for Georgia Tech. Against Virginia Tech, 81 plays for Pitt on offense, 60 for Virginia Tech. Last week against Clemson, 82 plays on offense for Pitt, 62 plays for Clemson. That is with Clemson throwing a pick 6, which so essentially Pitt lost the possession there. If you want to go that way, so
which was a hilarious,
just the dumbest play call, right? And it was blown up. Like there was nothing. Like even if he completed it, like take the guy that returned it for a touchdown away. Like that play was getting no yards. Just all around, just a horror. That basically was the epitome of the Clemson season on offense. But yeah, like Pitt has this like that kind of like they're not running the ball like at a great clip, over that span. They probably ran it about 4 to 4.5 yards per play. Like it's not anything that's like incredible as a rushing offense, but there is something to be said. And this is kind of similar to Michigan. Like you start wearing these teams down, and like there's things like if you throw early in the down, and like all of a sudden it's like 2nd and 5, and you run for 3 yards, like that doesn't look good from a yards per play standpoint. But 3rd and 2 is really nice, and that's kind of what Pitt's doing. Like and Pickett scrambling for first down. Like it was just one of those things where it's like, all right, 4 yards here, 5 yards here. Well, that's kind of like death by 1,000 paper cuts there. Like it's tough because they're explosive through the air, and then all of a sudden they just have this like. It's just like Clemson can't run the ball at all, right? Like they when you don't have negative plays, and this goes with the Michigan State game as well. Like Michigan's offense, like their one running back always falls forward. If Pitt's always gaining 3 yards on the ground, like that's such a big help to Pickett, who's a Heisman contender at that point. I think he's third.
He has 1 interception,
right? Like it's just one of those things where it's like, all right, on top of it, they're getting this on schedule thing. I always said this with Tom Brady and the Patriots. Like, sure, Tom Brady didn't throw the ball down the field that much at the end of his, Patriots career, and Patriots fan can get mad all they want, but he took 4 yards when he could get 4 yards, and that is such a big thing. And if Pitt can get those 3 yards, 4-yard carries at the end of games, like it's just really, really difficult to win here.
And about halfway through that second quarter, they had 3 2nd and 10s where they ran the ball for 1 or no yards, and then they completely changed. They were like, we're just throwing it on first down, we're throwing on second down. And they started throwing the ball, and they moved the ball great going into the half. And then coming out of the half in that third quarter, they kind of dominated again. And then they just, I hate that they tightened up like that, but against a team like Clemson, just avoid the big turnovers. And then Pickett, if it wasn't there, he tucked it and he ran for first downs. And like, that's a good way to win college football games, by not making the big mistakes like Clemson did in the red zone. And then the 3rd and 5 shovel pass play call, and like they just mucked it up. Whereas Pitt was like, we're just going to give the ball to our best players, and Abenconda and Addison and Pickett, and just let them play.
I think it was one of those things too. Like Clemson's offense is so bad, we're like, all right, we're going to make them kind of go big. We're going to play it like Pitt's defense is able to be beat deep. We saw that with the Shipley drop. That's kind of the way you beat Pitt. Hey, we're going to make them. We're going to make them do it, and we're just going to try to run some clock a little bit. Sometimes there is a little bit of, there are some times where it's okay to kind of play it that way. There was no reason for Pitt to really be aggressive in like kind of in plus territory, like a 4th and 5 at the 45. Like, sure, you could probably punt. the game situations do change a little bit there. But I can see a little bit of a slow start for Pitt here, but Miami's a train wreck. But they have had some wild games. They just beat North Carolina State last week. Their last 3 games have been decided by a total of we got here 6 points. So maybe they keep it close and make Pitt, as you said, I guess it would be Pitt in the way that I phrased it. It's just typical letdown spot here for Pitt. So Georgia and Florida, this couple weeks ago seemed like a just monumental game. Kind of lost a little bit of its shine here with Florida. Kind of, they dropped the unfortunate game to Kentucky where they kind of dominated and things just went against them. I think they had like 11 false starts in that game. They had a blocked field goal or a fumble return for a touchdown for Kentucky in that game. And Georgia has just looked dominant. You mentioned in the Michigan breakdown that Georgia really hasn't needed to throw the ball, which is a good problem to have. They haven't given up more than 13 points this year. Florida, I will say, by a good amount, is the best offense they've faced. Yeah. Florida's this weird offense, though, in that they can look really, really ugly, but at the same time, like the next drive looked fantastic. It's kind of weird. But yeah, this is basically a game. Can Florida, score? Dan Mullen in these spots right against Alabama, he was pulling out all the tricks and scoring. He's a good offensive coach. They had a bye week, so did Georgia, but he's going to pull out everything in this game. I kind of lean towards this under, but with that bye week and kind of how Mullen is, I stayed away. But can Florida can they keep this close?
Yeah, I lean Florida. I was on the edge of playing Florida. If 14.5 was widely available and is available at some square books, because of course Georgia has a number 1 sitting next to their name, and a lot of square books will play that. If this 14.5 was widely available, I would have been on Florida in this game, and I lean towards the under as well. I mean, at 48.5, it's ticked down a little bit. It was 51.5 earlier this week, so down to 51 now in most spots. I think this is the most classic Florida team. They're going to blow out bad teams, terrible teams on athleticism alone, because they do still have an incredibly good recruiting class and incredible athletes on both sides of the ball. I don't think they're the greatest coach team in college football, and that's why they lose the mediocre team with like decent coaches, right? On the road, they just don't win these big games, but then they'll play these elite level teams and the talent shows up. Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson will have to be great, obviously, but I do think they're going to keep this close. Like you said, Georgia hasn't had a pressure offensive drive yet. Stetson Bennett hasn't thrown one pass that had implications on it, right? Like JT Daniels hasn't played in a month. I think he'll play when he's healthy. He's supposed to be the best quarterback in college football from an NFL draft perspective, right? Coming into the season, they were like, this is the number 1 quarterback, right? I think he'll play when he's healthy, but if he's healthy this week and they're kind of saving him up for a big spot like this and letting him get healthy because they're going to win anyway, he hasn't played in a month. And now he has to go against a Florida team that did play Alabama close, the second best team in the country close. So I think this game's going to be close. I think Georgia might actually face some adversity on the offensive side of the ball. They certainly haven't played athletes like Emory Jones and Anthony Richardson who can run and throw the ball quite yet, at least not this good. So does Florida win? No. Like the stat of Georgia not giving up more than 13 points in a game is kind of insane, right? Like I think Georgia will be able to score more points than that against Florida, who just got lit up by LSU and a few other teams along the way. But when they needed to get stops against Alabama in the second half, they weren't getting them, right? Like, and Alabama's offense, I think, is far superior to Georgia's offense at this point. But on the flip side of things, they have to avoid turnovers, right? To win this game, they have to be absolutely perfect. And I don't, it's a tough ask. Like, can they win? Yeah. Do they keep it close? I think so. I think this is a 10-point game with Florida with the ball and, having a chance in the second half to make it close. The problem is they just have to be perfect and they need some weird bounces and they need like a muffed punt and like some shitty things to go their way. But I do think they'll keep this closer, and I do lean dog and under sort of a little bit of a correlation there.
Yeah, I'm with you. 14.5, I thought Florida was probably worth a play.
If you can get that, you can play it. It's not really widely available for me, so I left it off. But if you can get 14.5,
it has backdoor central written all over it. Yeah. Like it really does. Kentucky kind of did that.
Do you think that Florida will get over 13? Because I think they will.
Oh yeah. Okay. Here's the thing: Dan Mullen's a good coach, and he's done this in his Florida career. he pulls out the extra. It's kind of like what Scott Frost I mentioned against Michigan. Like Scott Frost had all these wild, like there's a bunch of motion and like misdirection. Like that's what the game plan is going to be from Florida. Dan Mullen's seat's getting a little bit hot in the sense of like they haven't been recruiting as well as what he like a couple years ago. They've dropped the game to LSU was tough. Now I will say LSU is a really good offense. Despite like we're kind of making fun of LSU because they're not Joe Burrow LSU, right?
Yeah.
But their defense is terrible. But like they put up 42 points. Like that's what you'd expect, right? Like that's a good showing from them. They just gave up 49. Now I don't know if they can stop Georgia's offense, but at the same time, if it's one of those things where I'm like, okay, I want a good offense versus Georgia. And I think Florida has a good offense. Like if you don't have a good offense for Georgia, you're just gonna get beaten to death, like and lose 20. Even if you have a really good defense, 24-10. Like it's just that's what it's gonna be. So they have they check that box for me, and then I look at Georgia, right, and I'm like, okay, 30-13 versus Kentucky. I personally don't rate Kentucky all that great. 30-13 though, whatever. They beat Auburn 34-10. Like sure, good win. Auburn's this weird team. Like Bo Nix isn't great. Like, Penn State kind of handled them. The game was 28-20, but like, okay, here we are, 34-20. They beat Arkansas 37-0, which at the time everybody was like, oh my gosh, Arkansas is ranked 8th. And nobody ever thought Arkansas should have been ranked 8th. We've seen Arkansas kind of, fall off a little bit, back to where they probably should have been rated.
Our priors matter in that matter.
Right. And I go back to this. They beat Clemson 10-3. Like, I know people want to say like first game of the year, and I understand sometimes it takes a little bit to get going. I get that. And people say like, oh, they were just being conservative. They knew it. I'm like, yo, it was 10-3 on a pick six. Like it wasn't like you were up 17-3. Hey, let's just hand off and throw a little, dink and dunks to get down here. So I have a little bit like I'm being a little bit devil's advocate here because I think Georgia's I think they win this game, but like there's that little bit of like if I was a Georgia fan, I'm sitting here a little bit worried, like, okay, Florida's offense punches us in the mouth. Can we do this? We haven't seen if Georgia can. I know that they've been scoring and beating teams, whatever, but I don't know. I'm sitting here in Arkansas, Auburn, and Kentucky. That's not like a death row. I know you look at the rankings of the time 8, 18, 11. Oh, they have like Georgia has 4 ranked wins this year. Okay. Like, I don't think Kentucky's that good. Auburn's a solid team. Arkansas is okay. Clemson's not good. So that's my kind of my reservation here. If Florida can put up some points, can Georgia? And this has kind of been my whole thing. If Florida can get out to a lead, like if Florida goes up 14-0 and we're in the second quarter, Georgia started having to throw the ball downfield against pretty good athletes. What happens? That's kind of my question here. So
I think it'll even be a big tell. Just say Florida gets the ball in first drive and scores a touchdown, makes it 7-0. And I'm not saying they're going to do that, but if they do that, I'm curious to what Kirby Smart does and if he trusts these guys or if he just comes out and he's like, we're just going to stick to our game plan and run the ball. And they got a punt. It's going to be kind of a weird situation for them if they trail in this game at any point and have to throw the ball, right? And Florida says, we're going to make you throw. Like Florida needs to make them throw the ball no matter what the score is. So like they need to put pressure on these guys to actually throw the ball, whoever's going to play quarterback, because they haven't had to throw a meaningful pass yet.
Yeah. JT Daniels averaged 4.5 yards per attempt against Clemson. That is by far the best defense they've faced. Again, Florida's defense has had some problems, but the big key here is this is the best offense this Georgia defense will face. I think we'll learn a lot about, like, even if, say, Georgia wins this game, like 37 to like 27 or something like that, the perception of Georgia at the top, like they're immediately going to come back down to like Ohio State, Alabama level in the sense of like, okay, you can score on these teams. Cause I think everybody would kind of agree that Alabama and Ohio State's offense is probably better than Florida's. And if Florida's able to put up points on Georgia, all right, now Georgia's defense doesn't seem like impenetrable here. So should be I'm super excited for that game because I want to see, I basically want to see Georgia give up some points before like the SEC championship game. Like I want them to be tested once because it'll give us a better picture of who they really are, how much better they really are if they do come back towards the rest of the pack. Speaking of a team that is starting to kind of pull themselves away from the rest of college football after a just brutal start to the year, for their standards. Ohio State hosting Penn State. They're 18-point favorites, total 60. Obviously, Ohio State looked rough against Minnesota. They lost to Oregon. They looked shaky against Tulsa. They made some changes on defense. CJ Stroud sat out the Akron game, I believe, with a rib injury, if I remember. Can't remember exactly what it was. He's come back and has looked absolutely fantastic. He's completing like 78% of his passes. He's averaging like 10 yards per throw. Like, it's just stupid. Penn State, on the other hand, 9 overtime loss last week to Illinois in one of the more hilarious fashions because nobody could score. Like, everybody was making fun of that overtime format. I think it would have been a lot more fun if the teams could actually score. You know, it was one of those things where I was like, Jesus, like, you know, like they missed like 6 straight times. Like, it was, I tweeted that out. I'm like, you know, maybe this is like a dumb format, but maybe it'd be more enjoyable if either team could get 3 yards. But big question here, Sean Clifford, Penn State's quarterback. He played last week after the bye week. He got hurt in that Iowa game. He missed the second half of that Iowa game with a rib injury. He played like he had no ribs. In my opinion, every time that he threw, the most telling thing was Penn State did not throw their first pass in that game until like 1 minute left in the first quarter. Yeah. James Franklin just said yesterday he's 100% healthy. I don't believe that because I saw every time he got hit, he took some hits against Illinois. It took him a couple seconds to get up. I can't imagine he's healthy for this game going on the road here. Any thoughts? I think your numbers are probably going to say Ohio. If I had to guess, Ohio State is there's too many points here. Yeah. But I mean, what number do you need? Like, how do you treat this? I guess, like, is there a number you need that like so inflated that you take Penn State? How do you treat these games?
I mean, we're getting up there, but I just can't. I crossed this one off before I even looked at the number. Yeah. I made it 13. Penn State on the road and just sort of a grind them out game, but we just can't make that assessment with Sean Clifford right now. And you would probably know better than me, but I watched the game and he's not okay. You can't say he's 100% healthy and you threw the ball with a minute left in the first quarter for the first time against Illinois, right?
Like, every time he threw, it was like, okay, like, no.
If that was your game plan, then James Franklin should have been fired after the first quarter. If he's 100% healthy, then you should be fired, right? Like, that's the only explanation. Yeah. And you probably make the argument for both things, I guess. But I don't see how to bet this game. I think the movement has gone to Ohio State and the movement has gone down in the total. I think because of the speculation, or at least the expectancy, that Sean Clifford is not healthy. If this game were healthy, I don't trust CJ Stroud still. I know that he sat out the game against Akron and got healthy, and he's been great since. But let's look at these games: Tulsa, Akron, Rutgers, Maryland, Indiana, who doesn't have a quarterback. They threw the ball like 14 times, down 50 points, right? Like, with 3 different quarterbacks. And Indiana's secondary has been lit up all year against bad teams. So I don't see. I do think this is like the classic spot where we made fun of Penn State all week and Ohio State's rolling against terrible teams. And then it's like, boom, here's a big talent, difference. And Penn State keeps the game close somehow and mucks this up and keeps it close and loses the game. But I think Ohio State's talent is particularly on the receiver end is going to dominate Penn State at some point. Like we always say this on here, offense eventually wins out. And I think that will be the case in this game. But I would you be surprised? Certainly would be surprised if Penn State found a way to make this like an 8-point game with a few, in the fourth quarter or something, and does the classic Penn State thing where like makes you think they're actually a good team again. Penn State's given up 300 yards twice on defense. I told you this in the first college football show that I don't trust CJ Stroud. I think he takes too many shots. I don't think his arm strength is that good. I don't think he's that accurate. And I think the Penn State defense will punish him a little bit. I just think eventually when you're not able to score because your quarterback can't move or throw the ball because he's injured, I just don't think you can score enough points against Ohio State to win the game.
Yeah, the issue, obviously, there's nothing else to be said about Clifford. That's the big, if Penn State can't, they score 14 points, they're not going to win this game. It's just no matter how good your defense plays, you're probably not holding Ohio State under 17. Like, that's just how college football is. My issue, I would believe that Penn State has a better chance. PJ Mustipher, defensive tackle for them, really good player, got hurt. in the second half of the Iowa game. And when he went out in Iowa, all of a sudden Iowa started moving the ball a little bit. Everybody kind of was like, "Oh, well, their defense got wore down. They were on the field. They weren't on like Iowa doesn't play fast. There weren't a ton of plays that they were on the field, so I didn't buy into that. I knew their defensive line was thin, so I did have some concerns. But the defense was playing lights out all year. I was like, okay, they can overcome it. And then Illinois came in and ran for 357 yards. I know it was on 67 carries, but like they literally just said, all right, we're just going to run off tackle. And like, if you can beat us, you can beat us. And Penn State could not stop them. Like it was Chase Brown with 33 carries for 223 yards. Like this is Illinois. And so now Penn State, this defensive line has to go up against Ohio State's offensive line, which is one of the best in the country. Travion Henderson has been fantastic. That's my concern with them keeping this close as event. Like I could see them just getting weird. Like even if Stroud doesn't play great, I could see them just getting like wore down on defense and eventually, given like 31-10 loss. And then all of a sudden Ohio State covers, 31-10 kind of seems like they made it closer than it really is, but like they still didn't cover the numbers. So it's one of those weird things. I really want to play this under, but I can't do it because if Clifford is like somehow healthier, then like this could easily be like Ohio State 42, Penn State like 28, and you're sitting there like just totally lost here. So I could see this 2019, like Justin Fields against Penn State. They won 28-10, I think it was, or 28-17. And Justin Fields like dove for the end zone. He fumbled for a touchback. He threw an interception in his own. Like Ohio State tends to play very bad against Penn State. I don't know what it is. Sure, you can say Penn State like finds a way. I don't know, but like they don't have their A game against Penn State, so I could see that. But the rushing performance by Illinois really shakes me off. But again, it's like the buy low spot on Penn State, sell high. You can't.
Yeah, this is the classic spot, man. Like these conference teams are always weird. There's always like we're talking about a lot of big teams here that have playoff implications. Well, between Michigan and Michigan State, one of the teams have to lose. Yeah, Pitt could easily lose. Like Pitt wins out, and there's a coin flip chance they're in. They could easily lose this week. I wouldn't be surprised if Florida keeps it close. Like one of these teams are losing, or I guess two of them are probably going to lose, right? Like someone in here that's a good team is going to lose this week. And we've seen it all year. It's just I could see any of these teams putting up a fight, and it's a weirdly shaped ball that takes weird bounces sometimes. Yeah, and one of those goes your way, and you never know.
I mean, we're not even talking about Notre Dame today, and they're a playoff contender. They're 6-1. They're ranked 11th. If they went out, they're going to be, again, outside shot of getting in, but they're going to be 11-1. They're 3.5 favorites.
Their losses against Cincinnati.
Right. I was talking to someone about there's like no way Notre Dame's in this. And I'm like, like if they go 11-1 and their loss is to Cincinnati, if Cincinnati loses 3 games at the end of the year, like sure, then you can write them off. But if Cincinnati's undefeated and we're putting them in the playoff and Notre Dame's only loss is to a playoff team, like how are they not considered for playoff?
With hurt Jack Cohn.
Right. They've had quarterback problems for like 4 games, So I don't know. I get we tend to the playoff discussions talk themselves in circles. I really wanted to dive into that Penn State under, but it's just with the Clifford injury. I'm with you. I'm just writing it off. It just really seems like it's a game where Ohio State's going to try to just kind of keep it at arm's length. Maybe Penn State gets they had the blocked field goal in 2016 to win. Maybe one of those things happens. So 2 games left that we're going to break down here. Ole Miss and Auburn. Auburn 2-point favorites, total 67. I'll let you go first on this one. I have a play in this game. But let's hear your opinion on it before I break it down.
Yeah, on the betting side, the one thing that's sticking out to me, I know you have 2 written there. I've seen some 3s.
I saw some. Yeah, I've seen
there's some weird stuff going on here with a 3. I think this game opened at 1.5. I made it 1.5 in on Auburn's side. If you can get a 3, I honestly really don't mind playing the 3 on Ole Miss. This is the spot where like, okay, this Ole Miss team is this and that, and they're on the road against Auburn, who's been kind of a letdown this year, but is still a talented, decent team.
They're like 5-2.
That's college football for you. Typical Auburn, I guess, season in general. But I'm getting the way better quarterback. I'm getting the way better offense. Like everyone, I think we've piped up Ole Miss to a point where like they're going to lose down the stretch here. Yeah. But at the same time, they don't turn the ball over on offense.
Speaking
Like,
of which,
that's
another
the
playoff
thing.
team, I forgot about them. They have an outside shot.
They have a lot of teams have an outside shot. It's just like they're all on their own independent paths, and that's what's weird. But in terms of Ole Miss, they run a ton of plays. They play super fast, and typically these teams have ugly offensive games where they turn the ball over. Maybe this is that game, but Auburn's defense has been pretty bad, right? Like, if anything, Bo Nix has kind of kept them in it. This is by far 10-year veteran Bo Nix is like keeping them in this season. This is, I think, his best season. But I just don't think they'll be able to keep up scoring the ball with Ole Miss. Like, if Ole Miss had turnover problems and they were still scoring 60 points a game and like doing this thing, then I'd be all for it. But I don't see Auburn really, moving the ball consistently the way that Ole Miss has. And a lot of that reason is because they just don't turn the ball over. Yeah, Bo Nix last week against Arkansas, who has proven to be fakers, went 21 for 26, and they kept it pretty conservative and whatever. And maybe that's sort of the key, is just like keep the game in front of them. But they're going to have to put up big plays. And I honestly don't think their offense is really that capable of getting the explosive plays and scoring 30 points in this game, or 35 points or something in this game that they're going to need to score. And their defense, for the most part, against decent teams and even against some bad teams, has given up some points, right? So if Ole Miss just continues to not turn the ball over, I think that Auburn's sort of more recent conservative offense just isn't going to work here. So if you take, I wouldn't mind the whole 3 if you can get it. Like I said, I made this game 1.5. That's where it started. I don't generally like fading moves. I don't know if there's any injury concern. I didn't really look into it since I didn't have a play on it earlier this week. But at a whole 3 here, like I said, this is like that classic spot that we're talking about where like Auburn goes and rolls Ole Miss. But I just don't think they'll be able to stop them as long as they don't turn the ball over.
Yeah, Auburn's in this weird thing. They had that scare against Georgia State, where they looked kind of poor. That was after the Penn State game. But like their worst offensive performances have been against Penn State and Georgia. Worst defensive performances. And like Arkansas put up 460 yards on him, but they ran 89 plays. Like one of those things where it was, yards per play standpoint, it looks better, but also they couldn't get off the field. But Auburn won that game by 2 scores. It's like this weird, again, this is typical Auburn Bo Nix team that's just weird, hard to figure out.
Yeah, right. But like Nebraska, that they remind me of Nebraska.
Right. Nebraska's a team, like Nebraska and Auburn are teams you never want to play, but like you'll probably win. You know what I mean? Like if you're a good team, you're probably going to get a win, but like it's going to be a lot more difficult than you like. Nebraska, like against 3 possible playoff teams this year, they've lost to Oklahoma by 7, Michigan by 3, and Michigan State by 3 in overtime. just be a thorn in everybody's side. But the key for me in this game, so I played under 67. Ole Miss plays fast. Yes, they have a great offense. Their defense isn't that great. It's shown at times to be okay, but there's been some times where they've been terrible. See the Arkansas game where literally nobody played defense in that game. Auburn, Bo Nix is good. He has a little bit of backyard football in him, right? Tank Bigsby is fantastic out of the backfield. Ole Miss does not have a good run defense. Their rush defense is terrible. So I could really see Auburn, going heavy on the ground with Tank Bigsby. Clock is running. We like that. But the bigger thing that I like, and I saw someone say this, and Matt Corral was banged up after the Tennessee game. That game was ridiculous. I think Ole Miss ran like 100 plays on offense. Tennessee goes lightning fast too against Arkansas. So Matt Corral threw 21 passes. He had 15 carries. Against Tennessee, Matt Corral threw 38 passes. He had 30 carries. So all of a sudden, obviously Corral's great. I'm not taking anything away from him. LSU last week, slowest game that Ole Miss has played in a while. He was banged up. He still had 12 carries, but it was only for 24 yards. Wasn't that great? They threw the ball 23 times. It was the slowest pace game that they played by far. It was actually a right around average pace game for college football. So I could Ole Miss can't just have Corral just running around. If they want to survive this thing, they kind of have to play it safe. So maybe they do this thing like, okay, we'll still give him a ton of, shares of carries and stuff, but we're not going to go at lightning speed the whole time because he's not going to make it. He can't run the ball 30 times a game. Yeah. That's just not going to happen. So I don't even have that factored into my numbers too much, and I still like this under. So if there is more of a conservative take from a pace standpoint for Ole Miss, I like this under even more. just from a matchup standpoint. I think Auburn's going to run the ball. That's going to move the clock. And I think Ole Miss is playing slower than what we thought. I think it's just a little bit of a little late for the market to move here. I mean, 30 carries against Tennessee has been banged up. I'm sure last week he didn't get much healthier carrying it 12 times. So I like the under there at 67. So and they go on the road. Their offense on the road at Alabama, on the road to Tennessee, it wasn't as efficient as what we expect. So if Auburn's defense, doesn't let up the big plays, which Ole Miss it's kind of like the Alabama Tennessee game last week. I'm always nervous, like 3 straight 70-yard touchdowns and you're undercooked. Yeah. But last game we're going to talk about Stanford, who's in the playoff conversation because of their upset over Oregon. Washington goes on the road to Stanford. Stanford is a 2-point favorite. Total is 48.5 or 48 here. Washington's offense is bad, but being this big of a dog is kind of surprising against the Stanford team. That's just bad. So what do you like in this game?
Yeah. I mean, I think both these teams stink. I just can't say that either team is better than the other one. So I played Washington money line. I'm not going to play the +2. I don't think it's that valuable, but I played it at 115. I think that number's still hanging out there. You get some weird money lines around this side, right? Because you can get some 105s, 110, 120s. 115 was about the middle ground that I could find. So I played that. I think there is some value here in Washington. Washington actually ranks 20 spots ahead of Stanford in terms of EPA and team EPA, I suppose. And I do think they're the better team, and I think this is a really good matchup for them. I like Tanner McKee, quarterback for Stanford. I think he's kind of decent, but they turn the ball over a lot. I mean, they lose a lot of fumbles. He throws a ton of picks. And if you look at Washington defensively, they're quite good at turning their opponents over, right? They've played these low-scoring, tight games. Every game has been close, and they lost the game to Montana as their first game of the season. But Dylan Morris threw 3 picks in that game, and since then he hasn't really turned the ball over at all. They're super conservative with him, but he does complete a ton of passes. So I think this is sort of a good spot for Washington on the road because Stanford loves turning the ball over. Washington does not, and the Washington defense can turn them over. So I like Dylan Morris to keep the game fairly simple and easy for Washington here. And you said it, outside of that Oregon win where the Oregon offensive coordinator was out and, a few hours before the game and all that, Stanford has been pretty pathetic. I mean, they beat Vanderbilt and USC, who have proved to be kind of bad. And, both these teams lost to UCLA and they got blown out by Arizona State. And almost all their loss, they just lost to Washington State on the road. And almost all of these losses have come from the fact that they just turn the ball over so much. And I think, if anything, this game will be close and at +115 in a tie game, close game. This reminds me of a game that could go to overtime, right? Like I'll take the dog in this situation. And I do think in general, just that Washington is even or a better team even than Stanford, considering the mistakes that Stanford, I think, will make in this game.
Yeah. I was very close to being on Washington money line as well. I probably needed, like, if I see a 120, 125 pop up, I'll be on that. I think from the number standpoint, obviously it's there. From a stylistic standpoint, Stanford, like, since they switched to Tanner McKee, the passing the ball has been their saving grace. Like, he's been throwing the ball pretty decently. That's not really the way you beat Washington. Washington has really good defensive backfield. Like, I think they're going to have a first round pick at corner. We saw against Michigan the second week of the year, Michigan threw the ball 15 times against them. They ran 56 times. And basically after the game, Jim Harbaugh said, like, yeah, we just didn't want to challenge them through the air. We thought we could do it on the ground, and they did. But they basically said, like, it's just not worth taking the risk because their defensive backfield is good.
That's the only bad game outside of that Montana game for first game of the year. That's the only bad game for Washington. And I'm sure there was some garbage time stuff going on here, but they were 300. They gained 343 yards compared to Michigan's 387. They threw it for 293, and Michigan threw it for 44 yards.
Yeah, they came
ran
out
it for 343. So
they did the change the game plan. Like they just started throwing, and like you said, Morris, like, he actually can kind of throw. Like, they probably should be more aggressive on offense. They just haven't been, because they started throwing the ball a little bit and, like, okay, hey, we're actually doing it. And, like, it was one of those things, like, Michigan was kind of daring them to throw, and they finally did, and it was like, oh, maybe we should have done this the whole game. They have been throwing a little bit more
Yeah, that was 31-10 in that game, but it was a lot closer than that. They just couldn't. They got behind and then they couldn't cap off any drives when they.
It was not a good performance in the first half.
Yeah.
The second half, they got. I would imagine of those 300 and how many 43 yards. I bet 270 were in the second half when they started throwing, because it was literally like, it was just one of those ones where the game plan was just totally off. Right. But I just don't know if Stanford wants to throw the ball against this defense a ton, and I've liked Stanford a couple times this year. It's because they've thrown the ball pretty well. Like McKee's been fine. Like he's thrown for, he's consistently getting up into like the 270s. Threw for 356 against Arizona State. So I am with you. I think the Washington money line is the right. I just need a little bit more, but I would much rather be on the Washington side of things than the Stanford side here. So we only gave out one bet each, so that's both of our best bets. Frank's best bet, Washington money line. Mine is the under in Ole Miss Auburn. Any final notes?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of these games, I do think there's a little bit of value, right? Michigan State. I think we both said, lean a little bit towards the under. That's a very, punch in the mouth sort of game. I don't mind. Pitt's on the edge of a play for me at 9. Florida, if you can get them at 14.5, I don't mind it. The only game that I'm, Ole Miss at 3, if you can get it there, I think you can play that side. The only game there I'm just running away from is that Penn State game, just because of Sean Clifford. In terms of other things going on, NBA and full beginning of the season mode, new rules, kind of craziness going on, a lot of weird low scoring games. James Harden has like 9 free throw attempts for the whole season. It's going to be a good NBA year. We started out pretty good here to start the season. So you can get over leadsportsbetting.com and get all our plays over there. College basketball starts November 9th. That's sort of my thing. I really like college basketball, especially on the total side. It's fairly easy. So you can get all our plays over there. Join the Discord. I send in the plays over on the Discord every day as well. So plenty of options for you to get more content and get more plays outside of just what we do here on Wednesdays.
Yeah, I'm probably going to start NBA this week. I took off because I knew the fouls were going to be different. I'm kind of glad I did. I've been tracking what I would have bet, and it's pretty disgusting to look at. I'm like 9-3 in sides and 11-8 in totals, but I'm pretty upset about myself there. But it's one of those things where it could go. I know other people who have taken the first couple weeks off on totals, and they've been getting crushed because it's just there's been no fouls called. So it's one of those things where 1 year you'll do great, right, and then the next year you're like, okay, I'll bet the first game of the year, and then like you'll go like 3 and kind of like your college football season where you started unlucky. Wasn't that you're like making bad plays, and now what was your like 24-6 or whatever your number is here, like
24-6 since going 3-11. I knew it would turn. I didn't think it would turn that quickly. But.
Right. I remember like every week we like talk about the game, like, yeah, man, like you're so close to just turn it around, and then all of a sudden you turn around for 24-6. Pretty good clip there. If you could do just a little bit of that the rest of the year,
shout out to the few guys that were like trolling me when I was 3-11, and I was like, oh no, I'm starting to panic.
24-6 since then, right in their face. So anyway, that is it for Frank and I. Another edition of Opening Line presented by leadsportsbetting.com. Like he said, head over. NHL, NBA, college basketball, couple like less than 2 weeks away now, or 2 weeks exactly. And then obviously still the NFL and college football seasons are still going on there. So head over there. Until next week. Next week we'll have some playoff rankings. First ones come out on Tuesday. So we'll have a little bit more to dive into for college football. Alabama's LSU's next week. Not a huge game, but always one to talk about. So for Frank, I am Austin. Until next week, we'll see you then.